And they put me through. And they ask me what's going on. And I describe to them everything that's just unfolded. And I end with the fact that I had been shot as a journalist doing my job. And after a very brief condolence, extremely brief, I think one host just said to me, "Wow, I'm so sorry that happened." The other one said, "Well, isn't there a lot of violence going on?" Which really made me stop at the moment and think, well, how could he even be asking me about this, about violence being perpetuated by protesters? I've just told him that I've been unjustifiably shot by the Los Angeles Police Department. Why could he be asking me about, air quotes here, violence being done by protesters? And I let him know, no. Then they asked me, well, what are they protesting anyway? What do they want? And I think that disturbed me even more. Because these were two people that had covered the Rodney King uprisings in the 90s. These are two people that had spent the afternoon ostensibly getting news feeds from across the country answering that exact question of why people were protesting and why they were so upset and why thousands of people of all ages, nationalities, genders had felt moved to come to the streets. But for some reason, they still had that question on their mind and they wanted to ask me that. And I think it was at that moment that I truly realized how broken media is in this country. The fact that two people that are responsible for giving us that first draft of history and helping us make sense of what exactly is unfolding in front of us couldn't grasp that simple concept that everyone else understood, yeah, that changed me.
It was a callousness that I don't think anybody has ever seen. But if you've had interactions with police, that is not uncommon. And so, again, a lot of the things that and when I say we, people in dilapidated and impoverished communities, people who live in low socioeconomic communities who are policed differently, who are policed aggressively. These are all things that we have experienced for eons. It didn't resonate and register in the public psyche until they saw it. And so now I think what has happened is that people are hyper aware of police and how they interact with the public.
And the police were never really my sorts of people. I never really, I've had some run-ins with them. Nothing crazy, but I've had some run-ins with them where you really sit down and realize that, oh yeah, these people are definitely racist, So I never really had a conversation per se with any of my folks. I don't have kids, but I would say the conversations I would have more about the police went from oh yeah, it's a couple bad apples, whoop to whoop to woo, to nah man, the whole system's messed up. You know what I mean? Sure, I mean you could have some good police officers, I guess, but at the end of the day, it's if you're a good police officer, at least over here in LA County and San Bernardino County, if he's a good police officer, you're most definitely doing you're definitely not protecting and serving certain communities, and you definitely harming them because the policies that they got in charge, the culture that they got, and I know this from experience, it's not made for Black folk whatsoever.
Being someone who's regularly, before I got sober, regularly incarcerated and being in and out of LA County jail, and then knowing that in LA County that you have to work the jail for like a year to become a police officer on the streets. And it was of no surprise to me that someone who came from a similar system of becoming a police officer would do that. You know what I mean? It was of no surprise to me that that could happen just from being so in that system from like the age of 18 till like 7 years ago. To me, a cop doing that to someone as they perceive as like a criminal that should be in that system, I'm like, yeah, of course that happened.
My parents are from the country of Haiti. So I was born in New York. And I think that's important in how it shaped my view of law enforcement. I was brought up to respect law enforcement, to understand their role is to protect us and that they're the good guys, right? And so growing up on the East Coast and then eventually moving when I was about 13 to the West Coast, my interactions at that level had always been benign, meaning that I didn't really have interaction. And so, there was this idea back in the 50s and 60s of the American dream, coming here, being able to own a business or do what you want, have a house with a white picket fence, and, the police were the good guys, and, the land of milk and honey. My sister and I and my friends, we were driving in a car, a beat-up car, and we were driving out towards, we were in LA at the time, we were driving out towards the Roxy Theater, I believe it was, towards near Beverly Hills. And I remember that we were driving on, I believe it was Sunset, heading west. And all I remember was that I saw, when we passed a perpendicular street, I just remember there were these bright lights, like they kind of lit up the car. And my friends are smoking cigarettes, so there was smoke in the car a little bit. But as we drove by, like the way the lights came into the car, you could see who was in the car. Next thing we know, police pulled up. They told us get out the car, and the way they treated us and the way that they instantly had their hands on their revolvers was the first time that I recall having a visceral negative interaction with them. And the officer immediately reached for his gun. I'm like, whoa, slow down, everybody. It's not that serious. So I had to sit out on the curb. One officer had his hand on his gun the whole time. And being in a lethal situation like that was absolutely terrifying. It was the first time I sensed maybe what I've been hearing but not experiencing was real.
Many of us have had incidents like that happen to us. So this is like triggering for a lot of people because you're seeing things and you're like, fuck, man, I could have died in that incident when this happened to me with these cops. That could have easily been me. And it's kind of eye-opening. I think the thing that's sad for me is, one, all the bullshit on the right that just attacked George Floyd. I mean, the man was innocent of anything and lost his life. And even if he wasn't innocent of having a counterfeit $20 bill, like, how can you justify this? Oh, well, you guys act like he was a great person. What does that have to do with the fact that he was an innocent man who lost his life over abusive governmental tactics that we see all too often? And this, again, this is to a lesser degree what led me to become an advocate and a fighter. It's abuse of authority. These people have this almost absolute authority. Cops have qualified immunity, which in reality often means absolute immunity. Because if you can't find a case that is 100% on point and you have the wrong judge, your case is getting kicked out and they're never being held accountable. But yeah, for the prison system in general, it was just a shock. And then the massive protests that followed, and we were like, go for it, I had friends on the street. I'm telling them, make sure you got milk with you. You know what I'm saying? To wash your eye, all that, prepping them. It's like it was great to see that. But inside, it was kind of like, to a degree, it was kind of disheartening because obviously there's nothing we can do. We can't be involved. We can't be in. It's like a national movement about something we're all so passionate about for most of us who care, and we can't really be involved. And so that was kind of disheartening.
Probably the most significant one within my work was the changes around the use of the 40 millimeter less lethal launcher that the LAPD uses. A lot of their officers went out and were given these weapons and had not been trained on them. I think that the LAPD's response to the protest was really bad, not only because of these less lethal weapons, which I spent most of the time talking about, but also their organization and methodology. They see a bottle get thrown from the crowd and they say, okay, now it's time to use the 37 millimeters. And the 37 millimeter launchers are these launchers that they have that are crowd dispersal tools. They're not target specific. They're not supposed to be aimed directly at people. They're aimed at the ground. There's a big difference between a crowd where everybody's throwing rocks and bottles at officers, and a crowd where a couple people here and there are throwing a bottle. And they didn't distinguish. They treated any crowd where any bottle gets thrown as a crowd that is unruly with hundreds of people throwing projectiles at them, and they're vastly different things. That would be my biggest fear looking forward. How are they going to react when there's another sort of large scale protest? Are they going to treat the occasional projectile as a reason to formulate tactics against the crowd? Is it the crowd were in and of itself one hostile entity rather than peaceful protesters with a few people throwing stuff? That's where my biggest fear lies, because that's how they acted during these protests, which is what caused a lot of these injuries. According to their policy and according to the law, they can go in and arrest that person who just threw a bottle. They can't shoot him because the threat's gone. They're not holding up a bottle. Their arm isn't cocked back. The bottle's already been released. And over and over and over, I saw in these videos, these officers somebody would throw something, and then they'd be like, "Oh, who threw it? Who threw it?" And find out where the guy is, and then they would shoot the guy. That's another thing that I'm wary of for the next time there are large-scale protests, how they handle that, because it seemed to me like an emotional reaction, anger at the person, time to shoot him, even though the threat's gone and you're not supposed to use the weapon in that. And that's a tough one, too, because it's not a situation where you're going to see very many individuals bringing successful civil rights lawsuits for injuries that result from being shot in that circumstance, and they probably at some level know that, the LAPD, right. And those cases aren't often going to bubble up, but it is a sort of a wide scale, almost from what I saw, seemed systemic set of constitutional violations, and I don't know what the future holds with respect to whether or not that's going to be reined in, but it's at the forefront of my mind as we move forward.
I was incarcerated at Lancaster State Prison, and I was living in 5 Block. I was a part of the Pause for Life program, the dog training program, and I know I had my dog in my cell training my dogs. I routinely watch the news, so yeah, I was training my dog, and I had my little television on, and it was just like this news break, going on, and they were showing the video, and it was nuts. It was just I really couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I could believe it, if that makes sense. Unfortunately. I mean, from just my experience, when I was arrested for my crime, I was assaulted when I got arrested. So it brought back a lot of memories and hurt, and realizing that the overwhelming power that the police force has, the generalities that they're able to use to take over a situation, it was disheartening. And especially being 2024, and you're thinking race relations are getting better, and then you forget that these race relations aren't just amongst people, but they're systemic. inside of these, big institutions that, haven't really gone through reform. So when I was witnessing Mr. Floyd's murder, you know, just like the dehumanization that he went through made me feel like they don't care about black folks. They don't care about minorities.
As a mom, just frustrated because it was another black man being murdered by the police. So it didn't make me fear for my sons, but it just made me want to be more verbal, just to have more conversations with them in reference to just dealing with the police. Just knowing that their skin color could just potentially make them a target to be pulled over by the police. Even though, I've raised them a certain way, it doesn't matter, because to certain people, all they see is a black man or a young black boy, and they just put everybody in a box. And it may not be all of them. However, it's just enough to make it seem like it's the majority.
My name is William Gary. I am Brianna's stepfather. I was asked to give a little information about my interaction with law enforcement and some advice I give people when coming in contact with law enforcement as a black male. I am 42. I've had many run-ins with the law, some good, some bad. I have been, roughed up by the police for making comments or laughing at them or bruising their ego. But I was one of the lucky ones that actually walk away and survived it. In the local news, no matter if you follow direction, you still might not make it home, because a cop got an itchy trigger finger, or they want to play judge, jury, and executioner that day. So it's your responsibility to make sure that you get home, make sure that you're safe. I wish somebody would have told me that information 20 years ago, but now I can give the information.
I feel like my view on police kind of changed after Trayvon Martin, and I honestly didn't know what to think. I was in I think I was in middle school at the time, and I saw that happen, and then my aunt was also a police officer, so I had a lot of questions and everything like that. But then after the George Floyd and I'm gonna call it how it is, how after he was murdered, I felt so many emotions. Like, I felt a lot of fear, because those are the people that are, supposed to protect us from, bad things. And then I also felt like I was really emotional, because it could have been, somebody that I know. It could have been my father, it could have been my uncle, it could have been my brother. So yeah, just off of those two, Trayvon Martin and George Floyd, I feel like I just became more fearful in the police.